welcome to Come Home America. I'm your host, Nick Hankoff. We are joined today by Michael Boldin, founder, executive director of the 10th Amendment Center, a non-think tank, right? Does that sound good? That doesn't sound good.
I've never heard that. That's awesome. Thanks for having me on the show, Nick. I'm excited that you're doing this.
Well, it's so good to have you on. Michael and I have known each other for a long time. I looked him up after reading Tom Woods' Nullification book. I was like, what? There's a 10th Amendment Center here in L.A.? Well, not here anymore. But when I was in L.A., Michael and I would hang out.
And we've known each other. Yeah, it's really cool.
That's crazy.
And we've done so many things working together. Like we did podcasts and blogging and events and all kinds of stuff. So I'm really excited that you're doing the show. So let's hammer it home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
that was a pun.
Yes. The only person punnier than me is Michael.
All my puns are intended.
All right. So the 10th Amendment, everyone knows, rounds out the Bill of Rights. It's the last amendment in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson or James Madison called it the cornerstone of the Constitution.
Jefferson called it the foundation. And interestingly enough, even though it is the end of the Bill of Rights, a lot of people think that the Bill of Rights are in a certain order and they have a certain order of prominence. Actually, if you study the state ratification conventions, not that we're going to get too geeky on this, but I think it's an interesting point. The Constitution was very likely going to fail ratification because a lot of people were opposed to it. And the phrase that the word anti-federalist was a term of propaganda. They were actually in support of federalism more so than the centralized power that was people thought was being granted under the Constitution. But the opposition was really strong. And when it got into Massachusetts early in 1788, so mind you, the Philadelphia Convention was summer of 1787, and it started getting ratification through Pennsylvania, Delaware, and elsewhere. But Massachusetts, we're talking Sons of Liberty, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Theophilus Parsons, John Adams, and others. This is a very, very important place. And early vote tallies, they were doing vote counting even back then, sometime in January, basically saying that the Constitution was going to fail. And had almost no chance. We know that John Hancock was probably drafting amendments to the Constitution as early as October of 1787. And they came together with a deal, primarily that they were going to say, look, Massachusetts, you guys, if you ratify, we're going to make a deal that will come up with amendments to the Constitution, what turned out to be the Bill of Rights. And so they submitted what they called were recommended amendments. They didn't require them at the time, but the most prominent one that they called for was basically what became the 10th Amendment, and that is the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states or reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The same thing basically happened in Virginia. It could have failed in Virginia where Patrick Henry was strongly opposed, George Mason, and they actually, when they ratified the Constitution, they actually called for an amendment to the body of the Constitution that was basically the 10th Amendment. So in various places, South Carolina and elsewhere, New Hampshire, they weren't going to ratify without this. So it was considered so important. And I think that's probably why Jefferson said this is the foundation. Without it, it wouldn't have even existed.
Absolutely. And so
that's the short answer.
No, of course. And what's so great about the 10th Amendment Center and just understanding this history is that the history exists. Like the Constitution didn't fall from the sky or be granted like a sword out of a body of water by some lady or something. So we have the history that informs so much, and it's not just up for anyone's guess. It's not just up for who's ever in power's interpretation. But obviously things have gotten out of whack since then. By a hair of a degree or so. And so
barely, right? We're talking the largest government, $25 trillion in debt, right? And that's not even counting all the unfunded stuff. I've seen numbers as high as like $170 trillion. And the largest military empire in world history. I mean, we're literally living under the largest, most powerful empire in the history of the world, hands down. And every time there's a problem, every time there's an issue, I would say a vast majority of people think you need more power in the government to deal with it. So that's the insanity that I think we see all around us. No matter how big, no matter how powerful, no matter how many rights they violate, whether it's civil asset forfeiture or militarized police or the war on drugs or war on everybody overseas and here at home, the mass surveillance, everything, people still are like, well, we're going to trust these people to come and protect us. And to me, that is absolute insanity. I want less protection from these government people at every turn possible.
Yeah, and we also see, as you say, like the largest empire, like crazy big government, like it all grew out of what might be described as the best intentions, however you want to put it. Like it's a great document. These are great ideas for how to form a government, especially for the time that they were written. But you know, and we do see today that it's gotten out of control, so far away from the founding, what it was meant to be. But we still have the remnant of this system. We still have localism to a degree, and you know, maybe it took 90% of the U.S. population being under lockdown for some of those like little shoots to shoot up, for us to see, maybe for us to remember some of the power that we have. Obviously, some of the local, like state resistance to federal government comes through a partisan lens. When there's a Republican president, then there's sanctuary cities and sanctuary states for immigration
it's
popping
almost totally partisan. I mean, if Governor Cuomo in New York is like the best 10th Amendment guy on earth right now, I mean he isn't, but
no, we're going to get to the
we're going to get to Cuomo. Okay,
Well,
that's cool.
Yeah, because we will get to that, because we're going to talk about COVID-19 pandemic, all that kind of stuff, because there's that side of maybe the state's decentralist, like quasi bizarro decentralist patterns that we're seeing form, but also just on the community level, a lot of people are coming together in interesting ways, or shop owners are opening shop against the rules and nullifying. We haven't even got into nullification yet, yeah. So let me set it this way.
Okay.
We have a system that is alien to the Constitution, or the Constitution is alien to the system that we have now in many ways. There's like just threads of this system remaining in my estimation. And
I would even say that's over an estimation.
Yeah.
And there really is. I mean, we can talk about it, and I think sometimes there are appeals to the constitutional structure. You even see like people citing Cuomo again, citing Federalist Papers and things like that. But I think, again, it is just motivated by partisan goals. Right. So people are I think they recognize that the general public likes the idea of like, oh, okay, well, these guys are following the rules, but they only seem to like it when it fits their predetermined political goals. So sorry to cut you off.
No, not at all. I mean, that is absolutely true. But at the same time, like when you join 10th Amendment Center, you become a member. Maybe this is in your store. I don't know. I'm holding this up to a couple different.
No. That is a very special one that available to the general public.
Oh, okay. So
so far.
All right. Well, very good. Well, I have this special copy of Nullification 101, but you have all of this on the website and the YouTube series. Great material that, like, basically, it just because we're so far removed from the founding doesn't mean that it's irrelevant to our time. We have this blueprint from James Madison from Federalist 46, and it's a wealth of information that people can look up and find about that. But when we get into nullification, so people can wrap their heads around 50 states, 50 governments. Maybe they can understand some powers being delegated to the states and not quite go all the way, or maybe they're unsure. But what is nullification, and why does it bother people so much? I mean, maybe most people watching this know, but I know a few don't, and we really got to get those few like understanding where we're coming from. So you want to give that pitch?
I can just do it in one word. It's marijuana. I mean,
that's illegal.
Yeah, well, okay. I think that's the great example in modern times. You basically have a plant that the federal government at every level, we're talking Congress, the courts, the bureaucracy, the executive branch, they say it is illegal no matter what. There is no medical use of cannabis just because a state decides to do this, but yet it still happens. So I think that is the best example, maybe in all time. You have 33 states doing something and define what Washington, D.C. says they can't, and they're getting away with it in increasingly large numbers. So when enough people say no to Washington, D.C., enough states or localities help them out, back them up in some way, even in small ways, I think there's not much that Washington, D.C. can do to force those things down our throats. And you cited James Madison. Madison, back in Federalist 46, this was written to a New York audience, to ratify, encouraging them to ratify the Constitution. They were probably under Governor George Clinton, not the musician, the other one. They were probably not going to ratify as well, but Madison, Hamilton, and Jay put a lot of effort into convincing the people to actually support the document. And one of the things that Madison said was, because there was great concern that there was going to be too much what they called consolidation or centralization of power. He said, look, when you get down to it, the states here are incredibly powerful. And he provided a 4-step plan on what the people and states could do to undermine and defeat federal programs, whether they were seen as unconstitutional. Madison called those unwarrantable, or if they were constitutional and bad policy. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important things, it wasn't march on DC, it wasn't sue in federal court, it wasn't vote the bums out, it was, in his words, refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. So the federal government may do something, they may say you're required to do something, but if the people exercise their sovereignty, their final authority in each state and do something different. Madison told us that if enough people in enough states did this, the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter it. And this was at a time when the federal government was supposed to be absolutely tiny. Now, they're involved in every aspect of our lives. They tell us how big our toilet needs to be. They tell us what kind of plants we can grow and consume in our own home, whether or not we can defend ourselves and our property, and when we have to go and fight and die for them in some foreign land. So because the federal government, in a weird way, because the federal government is so large, it's so involved in everything, it's actually easier to undermine it because, as the National Governors Association told us back in 2013, states are partners with the federal government on, quote, most federal programs. And we know that partnerships don't work when half the team stops playing. So all you have to do is opt out and say no. This is the Rosa Parks. I mean, maybe you can see in the background. This is the Rosa Parks method. Just say no. And when enough people do this and stand up for their rights by not participating in the federal government, their plans, their programs, then we're going to have more liberty.
Well, it's beautiful to see people protesting some of these lockdowns and things. You know, a lot of folks are out there for the first time in their lives, or maybe for the first time in 40 years or something. Uh-huh. And so they, you know, maybe they don't know about Madison's blueprint. They don't know about the 10th Amendment or nullification, but it's like a natural thing to just go out in the American tradition, to go out and freely assemble and protest, even if it risks breaking a law. And so
that's a great point. I don't think normal National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, maybe Paul Armentano is the deputy director. He understands when we're talking about nullification, but they're not promoting what's going on a state-by-state level as nullification. Neither is Marijuana Policy Project, neither are the immigration sanctuary cities. No one's really promoting it as that, and I don't care what people call it. What I care about is that power is decentralized, because if we're really, when you get down to it, the goal here isn't to empower states. This isn't about states' rights or state governments. We want to advance individual liberty. And when the decision is so far away in the hands of the largest empire, the largest government in the history of the world, the chances for liberty to flourish are virtually none. And even though our local tyrants are absolutely awful as well, our state level, there are no good governors. I guarantee you all the states are absolutely horrible. But you know what? You actually have a chance of doing something different at a state level where you absolutely do not on a federal level. We want to get the decisions made as close to the individual as possible for individual liberty to have a chance to flourish.
And you're exactly right to bring up marijuana as a great example of how this works so people can understand and visualize it for an array of issues. One of my favorite issues is the Defend the Guard Act. And so I wanted to know how is the progress on that effort? Like for folks who don't know, the National Guard is supposed to do like 3 things that the Constitution lists. It's repel invasions, quell insurrections, and enforce the laws of the land. And I think I don't know if it's enumerated, but they've sort of been also treated as like these emergency first responder type units where they will help in natural disasters or things of that nature. So
governors could do that whenever.
Yeah,
so
right.
really what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 and 16 of the Constitution, short version, they basically say militia units. Now, a lot of people are going to get confused here and think that we're talking about the right to keep and bear arms. No, no, no. What we're talking about is the organized or unorganized general public. Congress decided to organize part of that into what they call the National Guard, and even the National Guard itself says that they are organized under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 and 16 of the Constitution. So the National Guard tells us this on their website. We know that means they can only be brought into national service, federal service. I hate using the word federal when you're talking about such a centralized power, but they can only be brought into national service under those three conditions. They shouldn't be just occupying Iraq or Libya or helping out destroy the people of Yemen or whatever.
I would say what I heard was at least the maybe not a majority, but a large minority are just straight National Guard from South Carolina and North Carolina in Syria guarding those oil fields in Syria.
Not surprising.
It's kind of wild to think about, like, okay, yes, we have troops in Syria. People understand that, but those troops necessarily like belong to two states for the most part, South Carolina and North Carolina. It's just funny to think like, okay, I mean, maybe we don't need to use National Guard troops for anything related to COVID-19. Maybe that's like not a good use of those resources.
Maybe there just should be less of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's not a military empire. You don't need
on its face. Sure. Yeah. And on its face, it's like they're in Syria guarding oil fields. Like they're not, the oil fields aren't going to bomb us, right? So it's just kind of like so far out there. So that's one of my favorite nullification issues, because people think of states versus federal government. It's all domestic, but I think it's the American people have not had a say in the foreign policy of the country, maybe ever, or certainly like going back close to 100 years, something like that, a very long time, certainly not me or you, right? And so our only voice in foreign policy, I think our loudest voice is just like in so many other issues through the 10th Amendment, through nullification. And so if we can pass this Defend the Guard Act in any state, I think that's a great effort in it. And I wanted to ask you, maybe if you don't know offhand, that's fine, but
I do.
Where the bill is doing strongest.
So Defend the Guard, just a quick summary though. Basically, should it pass, the legislation would ban the state from actually releasing Guard troops into active federal duty unless one of those three constitutional requirements were met. So in other words, without a declaration of war from Congress, they cannot be sent overseas. There are some actual arguments to be made that they shouldn't even leave the country in that scenario. There was opposition to this in the War of 1812, sending Guard units or militia units, the general public, into Canada. Mr. Madison's war. I mean, Madison probably was one of the best spokesmen for an anti-war position today from the founders. For example, he told us, of all the enemies to the public liberty, war is the most to be dreaded. Why? Because war gives us armies. Armies give us debt and taxes. And mind you, this is his words, not mine. Armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. So, but Madison, once he got into power, there was some great opposition to him in the Northeast because he was this War of 1812. It's a great example of how power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The hated Daniel Webster. This guy is no constitutionalist. He's no libertarian. I'm not a big fan of him, but he knew at the time that this interposing against the central government and the people of his state was the highest duty. That was what their duty. He said that was one of the reasons that the state even exists, is to block the federal government from sending the people off to war when they're not supposed to. So he actually was telling us back then that this was really what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just say, no, we're not going to allow it to happen. So I think this is probably going to be one of the most difficult pieces of legislation to ever get passed. We work on things that are much easier that we can actually chip away on. Thomas Jefferson, in a great letter to his friend, the Reverend Charles Clay, in 1790. He told us that the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We can't get it all done in one chance or one step. So we work on things that can get small steps forward for liberty. But at the same time, we have to keep the ultimate goal. We have to have something out there to show people this is what needs to be done. So one great hero, a number of them actually, but a guy, Delegate Pat McGeehan in West Virginia, has really been leading the charge on pushing this legislation forward in West Virginia for a number of years. And the first few years that he did it, I didn't even hear that it happened until too late. And then basically our organization here kind of blew off some of the ground game support in helping him out. But over the last couple of years, we've really helped work with him as much as possible. Mike Meharry, my great buddy who's worked with us for a long time, he has interviewed him. We've done a lot of back and forth, but Pat has done so much work. He basically, last session in 2019, he actually got the bill to the House floor for the first time ever. But I don't know if it was a colonel from the National Guard actually visited the Speaker of the House and the governor and said, you guys passed this thing. You guys are going to be on the BRAC list. This is base realignment and closure list. So the federal government comes in and they threaten to shut things down. And that makes it very difficult. So I don't actually foresee some legislation. I'm a cynic in many ways. I don't foresee something like that passing in the very near future. But I certainly know that if you don't try now, people in the future, 5, 10, 20 years in the future, are going to have to start from scratch. So we're building the foundation to not just call Congress and oppose war, because that's a failed strategy. It hasn't worked for how many years? I mean, it just, people keep calling and calling and calling. It doesn't change things. We know that the only way to stop the empire is to resist it, to nullify it, to undermine it at every turn possible. Now, mind you, just on foreign policy, it's not just the Defend the Guard Act. We actually learned that the CIA rendition program that was so prominent under George Bush was actually, what we found was that most of the rendition flights were actually run through a government-owned, state and local government-owned airport in North Carolina. So we also have model legislation that we haven't really kind of pushed out there yet.
Yeah, that's the first time hearing of it. That's
to ban
amazing.
The use of state and local facilities for CIA rendition flights. So there's all kinds of different ways that you undermine the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. And to be honest with you, let's say that passed in a place like North Carolina. A lot of people would probably say, yeah, that's not doing much. But I'll tell you what, and they'll just move it to another state. But you know what? Some dudes in their apartment with their pants off, sitting in a spare bedroom, have created a scenario where the empire has to move to another state and change their plans. To me, that means if more people start doing this type of thing, we can actually stop them in the long run.
Oh, yeah, and keep them on the run. I mean, make them work for their tyranny, right?
Smoke them out.
That's right. So you say you're a little cynical on some things, but I know that you're no one would take you for a cynic unless you told them that you were. Like, that's not your demeanor.
Tell them that. I was talking to Bob Murphy. Bob interviewed me for his show this week too, and he's like, "You're such a positive, happy guy," and I think that's really interesting because I'm so positive about the work that I do. I really believe in teaching people about the foundation of the Constitution, about the principles of liberty, and how to actually defend those things, how to actually not just march on DC and vote for people, but how to actually do it whether or not government wants us to. And I'm still a cynic. I don't necessarily hold hope that we're going to have liberty in our lifetime, not to steal something from Free State Project, but I just know that it's my duty to do what's right no matter how difficult the odds. It's like a classic David versus Goliath situation, isn't it? And it's like, if you're not gonna get what you want, you still do it anyways. You'd still go for it. Yeah. So,
well, very good. Let me ask what issue maybe you're less cynical about. I know you mentioned marijuana, and that's like one that just seems unstoppable. But is there any number two or another top issue that maybe you're hopeful for in the near future? Like those of us who really like nullification or want to see more decentralization. Is there any one issue that maybe is good for coalition building? What do you say?
Maybe I'm like too harping on my cynicism. I think I'm thinking on a big picture because what I find is and you kind of talked about this already a little bit, about how people will be on board with these ideas of decentralization, the founders, Constitution, liberty, whatever it may be, based on their own personal political goals. So I'm very cynical because, as you know, my organization started in 2006 when George Bush was in power, and of course
you guys supported him, right?
Yeah. All the right wingers. I have so many old school emails. I really should start doing Throwback Thursday posts about like, oh, move to Cuba, commie. You know, you support the Constitution means you must be a communist. You hate America, things like that. And then a lot of those people started loving our work when Barack Obama came in power, and then we were racist neo-Confederate nut jobs. And then now it flips around again. So it just keeps back and forth. But I guess where I have a positive take is that every time that the partisanship flips around, I think some people actually recognize that everybody else is a bunch of lying pieces of garbage, and they stick with us longer. But it's just that a very, very, very slow process. I mean, we definitely are growing, and I know there are areas where we're seeing some success. It's just that the big picture, even though we have 33 states that are effectively winning against Washington, D.C., I think it's just a matter of time before the feds, basically legalize cannabis just to save face, because they don't want people to learn that, like, oh, well, we lost, we'll just stop doing stuff, then the states will win, because then they'll get the idea that they can do that on other things like guns or whatever. So I think over time we will see more and more victories like this, but still the big picture is that we're living under the largest government in history. And I think that's my cynicism. But we do see other efforts where there's a lot of positive things happening amongst the negative. And I think civil asset forfeiture is the first one that comes to mind. I'm not sure how much I should explain asset forfeiture, but the short version is government has laws on the books, both state and federal, that says that if they think a piece of property is the proceeds of criminal activity or was used in criminal activity, that they can take it, and then you have to prove that it wasn't. Upside down, flipping due process upside down.
Yeah, no warrant, nothing, no investigation. Or
mind you, in a lot of places, they don't even have to charge anybody with a crime. Right, and there are actually weird court cases like State of Texas versus a 1989 Chevy Suburban, things like that. I'm not sure the exact names, but really weird stuff like that. So there has been a very interesting bipartisan, usually bipartisan means they're really going to scam you, but there's been an interesting bipartisan left-right coalition. I'm not talking about progressives and libertarians primarily. I'm talking about like mainstream Democrats and mainstream Republicans on the state level saying, we're going to kind of shut this down. So a lot of states have actually really cut back on civil asset forfeiture. And then this exposed a few years ago the federal program, the federal asset forfeiture program called equitable sharing. And what happens, and part of this comes through the federal militarization of police. There's about 500 or 600 what's called joint task forces for various things, mostly drug war, mostly gun control. And so most local law enforcement agencies, sheriffs, police department, things like that, participate in various joint task forces with the federal government. So let's say California, we'll use this as an example. It was a very good example up until a few years ago. California actually had some of the best laws restricting civil asset forfeiture on a state level in the country. So what happened? Every time a law enforcement officer or a sheriff or whatever wanted to take some property but couldn't under state asset forfeiture laws, they literally called up their partners in the FBI, the DEA, the DOJ, and said, yeah, we think this is a drug case. This is probably a federal case. And so then the case gets passed off, transferred to the federal government. The local law enforcement still works the case. They take the property. They do an end run around the state law restricting it. And then through the equitable sharing program, all the property and funds get transferred to the federal government, who keeps 20% of the proceeds and dishes 80% out. So what we've seen in recent years is somewhere between 8 and 11 states, I forget off the top of my head, have opted out of the federal equitable sharing program in 80 to 90% of cases. Actually, what I like about that one, this is kind of a low-hanging fruit issue, because logistically, unlike the Defend the Guard Act, which is going to take a lot of backbone and actually, like, if once one of these actually eventually passes, you're going to have a real kind of intense standoff, whether legal or other, with the federal government. On the asset forfeiture program, it literally is as simple as just opting out. They can't force them to participate. They try to bribe them into participating, but if they don't, New Mexico, Ohio, Arizona, in some ways, Nebraska, here in California, Colorado, and elsewhere, if they just don't participate, there is no more federal equitable sharing program in those areas, or very little of it. So to me, I've seen a good deal of success on that, and we're pushing really hard for more.
And I commend you guys for pushing on the issues that are easy and the ones that are hard and the ones that, maybe
easy,
you have
right?
to work.
We say easy, right?
No, I know. And like we all know that it's never easy. Anyone who's gone to a city hall meeting or gone to the Capitol, they know it's not easy, right? So tried to call your representative, vote the bums out. No way is easy, but this way it does have an effect, as you say, either on the margins or sometimes there's great victories. And so far, I think you've been a little modest, not like talking up your big victories, but maybe we can get more into that a little later in the show. If we run out of time and I don't ask certain questions, then it won't
we'll have to do a second episode.
Yeah. And I just don't know if I have room for you for another episode after this one.
Not this year.
No, yeah.
Maybe somewhere down the line.
No, absolutely. No, we're doing this every day, so it's just going to be
tomorrow at 5, right?
Well, let me ask you about L.A., where I used to live, and what's funny is I got out like at the right time, didn't I? Like, it just seems nuts there now. Like, gas is cheap and the roads are open, but it's not a good place to be. It looks like. I mean, I'm watching you're sharing photos of bike rides around downtown LA. I mean,
it's weird.
What's it like? I mean, is it nerve-wracking? Is it just like, are you used to any of it? Like, just give us the gist of your experience. But I'm kind of curious about just other people, their reactions, their attitudes, if you are even near other people while you're out there.
I kind of like being at home a lot. I mean, I work from home. So to be honest with you, in comparison to what a lot of people are dealing with, I'm very grateful for the life that I have. I've been very lucky. I've also worked very hard to establish this organization over a period of nearly 15 years, to the point where, I mean, I'm not rich, but I am paying the bills on it. I'm very grateful for all the people that support, who have that Nullification 101 handbook like you do, Nick, for example. Like, that stuff is pretty awesome. And like, when I started the organization back in 2006, literally as a blog, I'm like, oh man, I am just sick of the Bush administration and their wars and the Patriot Act and the war on drugs and the Real ID Act and all this stuff. And I'm just going to blog how everything they do doesn't fit within the Constitution. Maybe I'll hit 5 people. And so even today, even though we're definitely reaching many more than that, just the idea that someone is interested in hearing this, to me, is just incredibly flattering, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful in general that I've had the opportunity. So I work from home 8, 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. So a lot of times my day-to-day existence isn't different.
Right.
But I like to go out and eat stuff. And sometimes I have errands to do, and I like to just go for walks. And like, I live in a nice area of downtown LA called the Arts District, and there's Little Tokyo next door, and I like Japanese food. And so when I go out in a busy touristy area, it's kind of a destination neighborhood, and there's no one around, and you just see like military helicopters flying around, or a heavy police presence that you're not used to, it is very, very unsettling. I mean, it is just weird. And even though we've been at it for like 2 months, honestly, when I go for just a walk to the market, I am just so anxious that I really, really need extra CBD to just get through.
Yeah. And, I was going to ask about that, because it's like, when you've been in the libertarian game or any sort of maybe activist realm where you're just maybe a little more sensitive to how bad things are, if we want to put it that way. Then when something like this happens, where even maybe we wouldn't have predicted a lockdown for this long, like, you're looking around like to see how other people are reacting, because it's like, the closest thing to this COVID-19 lockdown, the last time I felt this way, where I was like, looking around like, am I nuts? Are people going to go along with this? Was the TSA pat down stuff that came out like on November, like it was like Thanksgiving when they started it, because everyone had no choice but to fly, right? So they kick it off like with Thanksgiving in 2010, and I'm like, man, people, they won't resist now because they got to go to Thanksgiving, but after that they'll resist, right? And then it's like,
maybe later.
So after they got away with that, well, that was my thing. I turned to when the COVID-19 thing went crazy and it was lockdowns and all this. It was like, I knew like it wasn't going to be too big of a deal just because of the TSA pat down thing. Like everyone
wild. You know, for me, actually, it kind of the emotion, and I don't know if maybe I'm being a little hippie about it, but I get kind of an emotional callback, we'll call it, to just after 9/11, 2001. It was really like, this is really between 2001 and then it kind of tapered off getting into 2004, 2005. I started protesting the street the day that the Iraq war started in early 2003. I was almost run over by a cop. Like I looked at him, he was like, I'm in a crowd of people at the Veterans Building in West LA, and he's pushing up with his motorcycle up on my leg, and like he's gonna break my leg. And I look him in the eyes, he's like this far away from me. I'm like, you don't want to run me over, do you? And he turned his head and looked down and ran over the person next to me. And man, like I haven't felt this type of dystopian situation since then. I haven't seen Black Hawks flying over my building or a Marine Osprey. Like I haven't seen that kind of stuff. I know what happens because there's a lot of military in Southern California, but I haven't seen it regularly for a long time. And it is very, very uncomfortable for me. I just don't know how else to describe it than that.
No, I get it. And this anxiousness, this how all these mixed emotions kind of fly together, especially at the beginning of this. Maybe it's tapering off a little bit now, but it's still got to be weird. But like, I want to ask you if any of it, if one of these mixed emotions, if one of them in there might be disappointment in a way, like, you know, do you have any sentimentality at all about the country?
No. Well, because, I'm looking for silver linings, right?
We're aware, right? Like we're aware of how bad things are. Like I'm going to keep using that phrase, and it sounds like a bummer, but everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? Like we're lucky, we're grateful, and we're not despondent. But at the same time, it's like we're aware of how bad things are. And so when something like this happens, it's like part of me thinks of, okay, oh, this is happening to my country that I love. I love being American. I love America, whatever, all its problems. And so you get this disappointment thing, this betrayal feeling, this, how is everyone allowing this? How are they doing this to us? All these questions, all these feelings. Do you have any of that? Do you share any of that at all? Like, I know it's sort of naive of me to think that way sometimes, but do you have
because
like,
I'm a cynic, connection? And I actually believe that most people really want a king. They want one person to tell everybody what to do as long as it fits their personal political goals. And that's kind of what we see in the every 4 year. I mean, you know, we know Tom Woods.
You're talking about people who have read Hoppe?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of king. Different version. So on the other hand, I actually have kind of a silver linings view. What I kind of like about, like, for example, the mandated face coverings in so many places is the weird position this is putting some governments in. I'm fully on board with it. Like, I know some people are like, I'm not going to wear a face mask. I'm like, heck yeah. In fact, I've got a particulate mask that is basically like an old school gas mask that's really hardcore. And you know why I love it? I love it because there are at least 18 states that have banned people from covering their face in public. Here in California, it's illegal to cover your face in public while in the commission of any criminal act. So if you jaywalk and you're wearing a mask, you can be charged for wearing a mask while jaywalking. In Georgia, it's illegal to wear a mask. This is an old school state law that has been there for a long time. They enforce this too. It's illegal to wear a mask. It's even illegal to wear it on private property without written permission from the private property owner. In Louisiana, it's basically the same thing. And this really kind of started out from the KKK era. They didn't want people covering themselves. But it's been twisted out of that. See, as soon as you give government an inch, they take 1,000 miles. It's been twisted and used against people to stop gang activity. In essence, black person wearing a bandana is suddenly a criminal suspect, or someone wearing a Guy Fawkes mask at an Occupy Wall Street protest is considered a suspect. So government doesn't like that people can't be seen and found. And with the proliferation of facial recognition technology, they can equip drones with facial equipment, facial recognition. They're putting facial recognition everywhere possible. Mind you, in smart cities like San Diego and not as much so here in LA, you can actually have facial recognition cameras and microphones in the new smart LED street lights. It's so dystopian crazy. So I like the idea that government is being put in this weird corner. In fact, the governors of both Louisiana and Georgia had to come out and say, like, well, we're not really going to be enforcing this one law while we require you to follow this other one. I want to keep going with the mask as long as I can. And I hope it kind of encourages other people to hide their whereabouts from government as much as possible. So this is me looking for a silver lining.
And that's a silver lining, you know. I grant you that, but it might be a little thin. It might be a little thin, Michael.
Oh,
because,
no, this is amazing to me personally.
Yeah, but I mean, they're gonna find other ways to track you. You know, that we already know from Edward Snowden. You know, the phone technology, how it serves the surveillance state. They have articles on CNN where there were two articles that came out recently against cash. Like one being like, you should be embarrassed if you draw cash out of an ATM. Like, what are you, like that sort of article? And then they had another article where it was, oh, if you're taking cash out, you know, there's COVID-19 germs on that cash. You're gonna die. Right. You take the cash. So they have this shame tactic and then this fear tactic, but they're coming out against cash, and that's all about surveillance because you know, they want to track you by you know, your cards and charge you more for, and you know, just have total control. So what about those means of tracking?
We all saw how the protests went in Hong Kong before these things went down, and you notice there weren't many protesters that were unmasked. They were literally pulling down poles with cameras on them because they're facial recognition. Because even if you find other ways, let's say you can make a Faraday cage. Faraday cage, you can block transmission of your phone. You leave your phone at home. You can't leave your face at home. And facial recognition tracking is ubiquitous in China. I read an article from a guy who used to work for the San Diego Union Tribune. He's been working for China Daily or some other newspaper in like Shanghai or something for a long time. He had to stay home, or his neighbor had to stay home due to some kind of quarantine thing. And the next day that they were home, some government officials were literally installing a camera on their front porch. I mean, it's happening in China, and we can't say it's never going to happen here, because in many ways it is happening here already. And if they didn't need to use facial recognition, they wouldn't be pushing it all over the place. The Real ID Act, which came out post 9/11, anti-terror kind of garbage of 2005, this is requiring driver's licenses to have facial recognition readable pictures. Thankfully, only about 30% of the country is complying with that. But the reason they do that is because they want to feed the massive FBI next generation NG facial recognition database. The more information that you feed to it, the easier it is for it to get more accurate over time. There are many other ways that they track us. They track us location tracking through cell site simulators, through our phones. If you got one of these like little fingerprint readers, which I've actually gone out of my way to never touch, eye scan things. All that stuff is all over the place. But really, when you get down to it, if you leave your technology at home, they're still scanning you by your face. And if you cover your face, they're starting to develop gait tracking technology.
I was just going to bring that up.
So, yeah. So, like, it's all there, but we want to, again, even if it doesn't necessarily, there is no silver bullet on this stuff, but we do want to make it as difficult as possible. I'd love to see people wearing Guy Fawkes masks, whether there's a COVID situation or not. I mean, there's not too many, but maybe I should get a custom one from Julie Borowski that has just a Guy Fawkes. I'm sure she's made something like that at Liberty Junkies at some point.
Yeah, you know, my mask, I picked a plague doctor, medieval plague doctor mask.
Awesome.
I was trying to find like a mask that says, you know, I don't take this seriously, and also F you and whatever, but it's like you don't want to wear a mask that's like rude or like.
Are they requiring it like, even where you are?
At Costco, which I'm not going to stop going to Costco, right?
Yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Let's say it was a private property issue. I mean, are they being required by government?
No, it's just a choice that Costco is making
Yeah, I mean,
because
I don't want to.
It's a corporate thing, and it's like, yeah, it's private property, but it's not a mom and pop shop like really hammering out, the plus and minuses. It's sort of this corporate detached decision.
Yeah.
But all the same, like I feel at home at Costco most of the time.
I've never been to one.
Well, I'm an executive member. I'm not bragging.
Oh man, I'm not an executive member of anything.
Yeah, well, okay. You're the executive director of the 10th Amendment Center. Don't forget. Right? Don't forget. But yeah, so I had to get the mask for Costco, and it's just I'm a sucker, man. Like I will walk. It's like a Gilbert Gottfried joke or something, but I will walk 15 miles to save a nickel on gum. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'll drive farther to save a little money on something. So I go to Costco, and that's why I got the mask. But no, out here, I moved to Fort Wayne, for those who don't know, and so in Northeast Indiana, the people were really great. Like, I mean, it was just a different vibe out here than in South LA or anywhere in LA. And so it was really nice. But then once all this hit, definitely a mood changed, and it sort of was schizophrenic in a way, or at least maybe it was just accentuated by different people. But some days were good and some days were bad. I went out most days, especially during that time when we were stocking up on stuff, because they limit how many eggs and milk you can buy, so you go to 7 different grocery stores.
In my markets, we had limits on tofu.
Oh,
I could get as many eggs as I want, but there was a limit on tofu and frozen dumplings at the Little Tokyo marketplace.
Well, buy all the eggs then.
I posted pictures of that, and I had so many friends saying, "Man, where I live, we'd have a limit on bacon, but no one's buying tofu."
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, there's going to be these shortages and things coming up that'll be pretty scary, maybe. But yeah, just in terms of like the community response, it's been kind of heartwarming. The little neighborhoods around here, they knew there wasn't going to be a lot of activity, like the zoo was closed or whatever. So what they did was they encouraged everyone through the Nextdoor app or Facebook or whatever. Like they said, everyone put teddy bears in your window, and then kids go, like parents, take your kids out for walks and go bear hunting.
Oh, is that really a thing? Because I've seen one around here, and I posted a picture, and I have people saying, "Oh, they're doing that by me too." What's the meaning behind it?
My boy loves this book called "We're Going on a Bear Hunt." So I don't know if it's based on that, but it's so the idea is just that kids would go on a walk, get your vitamin D, and then go out, and part of the fun, since you can't really do anything else,
that is
like,
really
there's bears out there. So yeah, it's really nice that the community can come together for certain things like that. The other parts are a little cringe sometimes, where the community is like, "Oh, we're all in this together," like, we're all following the government together, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So I
wish they'd be in it together the next time that Trump or whoever's going to be next, Biden, wants to bomb somebody. I mean, that's really unfortunate that they haven't.
Yeah, but maybe this is the beginning of something, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are some strong communities out there, but I feel like part of what this show is going to be observing is this sort of alienation and detachment. We don't have as many strong communities as we should. Otherwise, it wouldn't be just these partisan efforts of nullification, but it would be more like, dare say, patriotic, I think, or at least like real authentic organic bonding of people, where they say like, "Hey, this is wrong," or "This doesn't work for us," or whatever.
Yeah, but Newsom keeps calling California a nation state.
Yeah, and so we start, like you said, inch by inch, or we go incrementally, and so maybe some of this is waking up some mood in the country to connect and like realize our strength at home and locally. And there's good and bad that goes with everything, but we try and find the silver lining, like you said. So we have a few minutes left here. Overall, like, you're optimistic or cynical about the long term?
I'm very optimistic in the long term. I just don't. I'm not a liberty. I mean, I want liberty in my lifetime, of course. Well, who doesn't want to be more free? I mean, there's some people who don't, clearly, a lot. But I'm not necessarily, I don't like setting myself up for failure. Maybe this is a defense mechanism, because how could you like literally do work 50, 60, 80, sometimes up to 100 hours a week, literally taking on the largest government in history with the idea that you're never going to get anywhere. Well, my thought is, again, if it's not me getting somewhere, I'm still getting somewhere because I'm setting the foundation for future generations. And someone has to start the ball rolling, because you're not going to turn over this giant government in one night. Whether we say it was 1913, that was a horrible year, or if it was 1861, or if it was back in 1787, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is we really have to teach people the value of what you're talking about, that it's not so many people, if they have a problem, they think Washington, D.C. needs to come in and fix it. So today, a lot of people on the right are praising one of the most anti-liberty people alive, William Barr, because he is talking tough against the nasty governors. Well, that's like literally saying, hey, Al Capone, I'm really interested in you coming to protect me from this local bully that you've been funding to beat me up for the last 50 years. Yeah. So
the standards are set extremely low. It's it's based off of what TV feeds us, what a lot of mainstream media feeds us. But you do a show, Good Morning. Is it
Path to Liberty?
Path to Liberty. It used to do Good Morning Liberty.
Yeah,
or
I
something
changed
like
it because
right?
I actually jacked somebody's name, and I reached out to this another group of people that are like Young Americans for Liberty guys in Tennessee. I'm like, oh man, they're doing this. So I reached out to them, and they were actually really cool. They actually said, well, we're not really too concerned about it. Like, we haven't had any problems. But I'm like, you know what? To be honest with you, it'd just be better for me to change. Honestly, it's a better name, because what I try to do is teach people how to get from point A to point B, really point Z, how to get to liberty. So we talk about the problems that we're facing today, and then some episodes we talk about how to deal with it.
Yeah, so I check that show out often on when Facebook Live comes up.
Nice.
But it's on YouTube as well, I imagine.
Yeah. So it's like on 10 different platforms. I do YouTube, Facebook, DLive, Twitch, Periscope,
Spotify, all that good stuff.
And it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Wink, wink, in case I want to throw out that promo.
No, that's good. And what I was going to say is, when we get this messaging from the TV or from mainstream media or whatever, I mean, there's more alternatives and more people are checking out the alternatives, but it's still, a lot of those alternatives still think of the people in terms of voters, right? And especially in this presidential year where, the voters say this or the voters say that. And the great thing about the 10th Amendment Center is you're not a voter. I mean, yeah, you can vote or you cannot vote. Boldin's not. But the key is like, as you see what works and what doesn't work, it has to do with how we view ourselves in relation to this system. And so if you view yourself as a voter, then that's what you're going to do. You're going to vote. You're not going to fulfill like a deeper obligation to your community, to the family, to your country as a whole. So as society as a whole. So the voter thing is a really dangerous term because it boxes people into either a red voter or a blue voter or whatever.
Oh, I like that perspective.
But when you think about yourself as, call yourself a tenther or a patriot or a citizen or however you want to think of yourself in that way, then all these other doors open for other activities that you would do. And so the 10th Amendment Center, I think, you may not think of it this way, as a very positive institution in the country, and I think we can get power from institutions when they're operated appropriately. And the way that is you're forming people, and it's not overburdening the membership, and you're not feeding off of the membership, but it's sort of a two-way street. And so this institution that you've founded is a formational institution in some ways, because it teaches people how to behave and how to act in the specific goal of reaching liberty, holding the government accountable, all of that. And so that's why it's a great organization to check out. And
can I just add one thing on that? I know we're probably running a little late, but I just did an episode of my show sometime in the last couple of weeks talking about sovereignty, and sovereignty meaning final authority. And the way I really pointed it out is, we know that old phrase, the whole John Lennon thing, power to the people. power to the people is basically people going out in the streets and saying, giving me power, asking government to give them. But if we know that the people are supposed to be sovereign, the people of the several states are holding the final authority, it really should be the other way around. Power from the people. And I think you actually explained something that I probably have always wanted to, but it's really about that. That's a great way. I'm going to use that. It's the relationship to the system. And if we're focusing on the people being the final authority rather than the other way around, begging for scraps at the table, I think we can actually change things in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's leave it there, and we will definitely do another one of these. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been Come Home America with Nick Hankoff. And actually, before I cut everything off, just one more time, 10thamendmentcenter.com and Path to Liberty is the show that Michael does. But is there any other plug?
That's awesome. All right, thanks for having me on, Nick.
All right. Thank you all for watching. We will see you in the next one.